Good morning. I'm mic'd here, so it's okay. I'm just making sure we're all on time. First of all, I want to say congratulations to Michelle, Lou, and team for organizing this event. I think it's more, and congratulations to everybody who showed up. I think this is a very, very important time to be very aware of what's happening. There's going to be no way around it. There's going to be no way around analytics, data, AI, cognitive, and it's coming, reminds me of when I started innovation, it's becoming a lot of buzzwords out there. So just sifting through the noise and dragging and kicking whatever your stakeholders are along with you, which is a bit about what this panel's about, is great. So I just want to introduce our panel here, which is really great, and thank you very much for joining us. We have Sami, sorry.
Yeah.
I guess I should remember the S. This is why I'm welcoming AI. They're always going to be smarter than me. Sami from Accenture, and we have Dan also with us today, which is great, and he's a principal solutions architect with GE Healthcare. And then we have Eric Bogart, VP Advanced Analytics at ACOSTA, and a former alumni of mine with Deloitte, which is always exciting for me. And we also have with us Mike Branch, who's the VP Data Analytics at GEOTAB. So welcome, gentlemen, and thank you very much. So I'm going to stand, if that's okay with you folks. Is that all right if I don't sit? Because then I can see you better. Just so you know, I'm not being rude and not joining you on the couch over there. I'd just like to give you a chance to each kick it off personally on why analytics is important to you, and maybe one or two pain points of learnings that is contributed to where we are today and provided value, either from you and delivering value to your clients, or maybe you had a role internally, so it doesn't really matter to me. And I'm going to pick on the end there. Maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, no problem. So maybe what I'll do first is just kind of set the stage about some of the things that we're doing with analytics, and just to give you a bit of a background on GEOTAB as well too, because I think that helps paint a little bit of a picture. So GEOTAB, first of all, we're the world's second largest provider of telematics. And what that means is we've got a device that plugs into your vehicle, plugs into the onboard diagnostic port, and tracks everything from your acceleration patterns through to your seatbelt buckled, unbuckled, engine RPM, even ambient air temperature in a number of vehicles. So we track about 1.1 million vehicles across the globe right now, and we ingest about 2.5 billion raw data points on a daily basis. So for us, analytics is crucially important to understanding how our fleets operate and helping provide them with solutions like benchmarking, classifying vehicle driving behaviors, and now we're getting more and more into the smart city revolution. And because we are essentially that IoT device for the vehicle, really understanding, the movement of these vehicles within cities to help them, uncover areas where there's hazardous driving areas within the city, road impediment data, really, really beneficial. So for us, crucially beneficial for both our customers and our existing fleet customers and new avenues of customers in municipalities and cities and the like.
That was a great, I just don't know if I could get my mic turned on. Thanks, thank you. I think that's a great introduction. I really hope deeply that you're focusing on my neighborhood in Toronto, and we can share later. I won't say where that is, I won't disclose, but there's lots of value to be provided there. And I know through our exchange, we'll get into a little bit of IoT and how that's pulling in data as we go. Eric, maybe you can go next.
So I work at a company called ACOSTA, and analytics is critical to our success in the future. We're a 90-year-old company, and we sit in a really bad spot. We're between retail and consumer products companies. Neither of them is growing, neither of them has expanding profit margins, and we're a service provider. And fundamentally, we're driven by people. So we have people who go into stores and do things on behalf of that manufacturer for the retailer. And what that means is right now we're an entirely people-driven business. And in the environment where we have to deliver value with less, analytics is our lever for that. So understanding massively what's happening, making great choices about what to do, and doing that at scale, that is what analytics does, and that's why it's important for us.
So when I hear you in industries where there's a lot of pain, the decisioning becomes mission critical from a competitor perspective. It's no longer, and as consumers and as providers or as companies you're in front of, there's not a lot of forgiveness left in the system. People assume you know things. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that more as we go forward. Dan, we also had a pretty good exchange last night, and I know you're with GE. Healthcare, that's one of my favorite spaces actually on this topic. So maybe you can speak a little bit about what you've learned and what you're seeing so we can provide a foundation for going forward.
Sure. Thanks, and good morning, everybody. So GE, basically what we're trying to do is we're using analytics to touch lives and moments that matter. And so you're probably familiar with our MRs and CT machines and all the equipment that GE builds, but a lot of people don't know that we actually build IT solutions. So we're right at the intersection of IT and OT, so it just makes logical sense that we start using analytics to make better decisions and drive better patient outcomes for our not only our customers, but the patients they treat. So there's a lot of things that are happening in terms of advanced technologies and digital technologies that are touching the healthcare space, as you know, and it's actually really, really unique. So I think I'm really excited to talk today about how there's some unique situations within healthcare that touch big data and analytics and some of the future technologies.
That's great. And last but not least, Sami, I know you're with Accenture, our former competitor, but now we can be friends.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is great. But I know Accenture has always been a leader in analytics and actually taken big leaps in this space. So maybe you can speak about what you're seeing as you provide services to your customer base.
Absolutely. And where I spend most of my time is really with kind of the telecommunications, media, financial services, and CPG customers.
No pain in any of those industries.
Yeah, not at all. And they're usually larger companies, and many of them have made significant investments in data and analytics and kind of the infrastructure to support that. So what I'm seeing and what my colleagues are seeing primarily is around kind of adoption and the return of investment, kind of lack of getting the ROI for all these significant investments. So that's kind of where I spend a lot of my time, is how do you kind of get the return on investment, how do you improve adoption, how do you increase collaboration. And the second aspect of it is around not just focusing on analytics for kind of insights and metrics sake, but really taking it and kind of embedding it and actioning those insights. So kind of figuring out ways in which analytics can kind of couple with system integration as well as business processes to actually kind of become a lot more meaningful and actionable.
So one of the things I think this audience would benefit from, and I think any of us who've been in emerging technologies, like most of us in our careers, there's lots of what I call Harry Potter scars in the journey that we hope leads to better solutions. And I think we all have big clients, and a lot of people face areas of experimentation and POCs, and when they fail, everybody freaks out. Yet they're valuable to the process. Can you talk a little bit maybe about what you're seeing in telematics and the space you're working in, and speak to something that maybe looked bad but wasn't because of moving forward, it applied such an important moment for you in the area of data and analytics and IoT?
Yeah, so I think oftentimes, I spoke about that 2.5 billion raw data points coming in on a daily basis. A huge challenge in that for us and for our customers is really making sense of that data. And you think we have it coming in from a number of streams. We have so much data coming in from the vehicle constantly. We have so much data coming in from our accelerometer constantly. Well, how do you actually make sense of that? One of the biggest problems that you tend to face is, and I'm sure you guys see this all the time, is making sure you're dealing with clean data, right? Making sure that the data is cleansed as it comes in and that it makes sense. And how do I turn these streams of data coming into something that I can start having a conversation with people about, right? So we start, it's sometimes as folks in the analytics world, it's very clear in our head, right? Well, obviously you can use vehicular data to look at weather patterns because they're virtual weather sensors. But until you start transforming some of that data and creating data sheets and data products and visualizations, it becomes complex to really have those discussions. So for us, I think a challenge was certainly doing that translation in an effective way so that you can have these business conversations with people. And I think one of the things that has helped us do that is really establish the right multidisciplinary team to do that. So the team that we've established at GEOTAB has a series of data engineers, a series of data scientists, data visualization experts, multifaceted, that come together and help us execute on these problems.
You touched on quite a bit there.
Yeah.
But which is all very good. I think I often feel like I'm marginally insane at the early stages of these conversations, but the importance of not giving up and translating it, because we see it so clearly, like you're right, and often the business is bogged down with the day gig and can't see how we're providing value. So through POCs, data visualization, anything we can do to make it real, I guess, for our clients. Dan, you and I touched upon this a little bit last night. I can only imagine some of the conversations you're having with clients, especially in this country, where healthcare is not always, we benefit sometimes because it's publicly funded, but sometimes it stymies innovation. So what are you seeing in the conversations with your customer, and how do you get over the hurdle of them not really understanding clearly the value you're bringing and how you can get it funded so that they can engage with you?
So that's a great question, and the funding models are part of the hindrance towards it. But what's really interesting, if we look at EMRs, hospitals will spend hundreds of millions of dollars on an electronic medical recording system, but how do you prove an ROI on that? And there is some business cases you could do for that. And then failures, e-health. There's
an
$1 billion
interesting
of failure there.
Is that a four-letter word in this country?
and I think what's really interesting, if we listen to the talks this morning, I thought they were really good. What we're seeing is the evolution of this technology is moving so fast right now, and that's really what happened to e-health, right? The technology surpassed what they were trying to achieve in that. So what we need to do is keep our eye on that. There's actually a great book, I don't know if anybody's read, called Bold, and it talks about exponential technologies, and we saw a lot of exponential graphs this morning. So to go back to our customers, what we've done is we've kind of scaled back. So what we do is we start with a customer and we look at, we use a maturity model. So a lot of our customers, a lot of their data is not even connected. So some of my colleagues here have the luxury of they've built systems to achieve a specific end. What we're doing is we're trying to look at legacy software, legacy technology, like equipment that typically didn't connect or connected,
or wasn't intended to.
Connected with serial ports or in some cases paper. So to gather that data is actually a huge challenge. And the quality of the data, I would agree, and I think I was just at, there was Amazon's Ignite in the fall, and I was on a panel with 75 other vendors, and what we talked about is actually data is going to be king. So you have a great app, but the app and the algorithm behind that app is only as good as the data. If you've got flawed data, what's going to happen is you can have the best algorithm, but it's not going to achieve the end. So getting back to, I think your other question was, how do we get value from the customer? And a lot of our value is, there's several types of value. So I'll give you one example. One is we've got an analytic around anesthetic gas flow from our machines. So there's environmental outcomes. There's also a financial outcome using less anesthetic agent. There's savings. And then there's better patient outcomes and outcomes for the people that are breathing the anesthetic gas in. So sometimes it's not just the finance, because sometimes the finance within healthcare is, well, that's great. If we save $10 million, it just goes back into the hospital, and the hospital's running a deficit anyway. So really challenging environment to work with, and trying to get data, trying to finance it, and work with our
And I guess the
customers.
right metrics to have the right conversation around value.
Achieve the right outcome. So we do this maturity map. We look at, the first thing is get connected, and then try to get optimized, and then we do the descriptive, predictive, and then prescriptive type analytics with the customer. So what we do is we say, we're here now, the customer needs to get to this particular outcome. And that's the other thing, is what we do with all of our analytics is they're all focused on specific outcomes. So there's been a lot of talk about algorithms and data and databases and all kinds of cool IT technology, but ultimately I think what we need to do is focus on specific outcomes.
Yeah. So Eric, maybe you can talk about this tsunami of data we keep hearing about, and in our retail CPG world, where there's data sets that don't always mirror, but the human entity in the beginning, when you think of retails like Amazon Go, and when you think of the self-serving store or the metrics to drive to malls, I mean, it's just, there's problems everywhere we look. And how do you turn that into value for your customers, and where do you even start? Because I think a lot of people in this room would value from when you say, like, where do you start, and how do you get through what looks like just a massive amount of information?
Yeah, I think really being sharp on, to your point, what are the outcomes, right? There's a temptation when you have all of this data to figure out how you mash it together to interconnect it. And that may be completely beside the point a lot of the time. And so being really crystal clear on what it is you're solving for, what is the operational challenge, One of the reasons that Amazon did such a great job with a completely self-service store is they're really sharp on what they're trying to achieve. Those shelves are perfect for exactly what they're trying to accomplish. They are designed to know out of stocks because the shelf is designed to display out of stocks to them. So I think it's a great example of designing from the outcome back so that your data will behave. But in my world, the data never behaves because it was never designed for that, right?
That's right.
And so I think one thing that I've learned is analytics really benefits when you're running contrary to the culture of the organization you're doing it in. When I was at Procter & Gamble, it was a strategy-driven organization, and most of the challenges were in driving better operational things. So you have a lot of people who want to talk strategy. Analytics will help you fix operations in that environment. In my current environment, we're a super operational company, and we need to think differently about strategy. So I think one of the ways to sort of drive those interesting big outcomes is to think exactly 180 opposite of the focus of your company, because that's generally where there's a lot of hidden gems. And by focusing on what those outcomes can be, you can make sense of all this data, focus on something, and get a big breakthrough that can really change either the appetite for investment, the aperture for where you can focus, or even just sort of breaking traditional thought patterns about how your business should operate.
So I think there's a perfect segue into maybe the middle area where we talked about how, pain that got us here, proof of concepts, lots of data, lots of misunderstanding, multifunctional teams that you talked about. Maybe I can ask you, Sami, because I've had telcos for clients too, so maybe we should mention the word silos now. It's like, and how do you have conversations with clients that are essentially not structured at all to get value out of their data, to get value out of analytics, to build the right AI culture so that they can be competitive in this new market? And I'm imagining with the number of clients you mentioned through those industries, you've seen quite a bit of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a number of tactics that we can employ in those types of situations, because as these companies have evolved, there's been experimentation within the telcos, within the marketing space, within the network space, within the supply chain teams. And often there are a couple things that I've seen kind of made some impact. One is around kind of some sort of a centralized leader, right? A CDO, CAO, or that type of kind of equivalent. A leader that can help sponsor and champion initiatives, a leader that can help kind of solicit and shepherd the funding to make strategic investments across the organization. And really a big part of what they do and what they champion is to kind of create this kind of COE or accelerator type model. I think we're kind of working our way away from kind of the shared service or CEO because it has kind of centralization connotation to it. But the accelerator is really around, we know there are various degrees of analytics across the organization, and different teams require different levels of support. What sort of kind of common support can I provide to each one of these organizations, be network or either the consumer organization or the B2B organization? And there's been a lot of effort I've found. We work with a lot of clients in defining what that model needs to look like, kind of that hub and spoke type model, and the set of services that need to be provided to create these standardized data sets, the enterprise data and AI platforms, data or data science type coach roles to kind of drop someone into a pod type structure to execute a specific use case and start to get some quick value. And there's also a whole notion around kind of reuse and collaboration. Oftentimes, if you look at a wireless churn model as an example, there could be 2 or 3 teams that have developed that type of model. How do other teams benefit from that? If there's a quick and easy way to access that or even gain visibility that already exists, it might get you 70 or 80% of the way there. So part of what's kind of catalyzing this accelerator operating model is this whole notion of the marketplace, the insights marketplace. And really that's kind of your Amazon-like kind of platform, kind of web-based platform to go and find what actually exists, from data to models to different types of analytical assets like visualizations and Tableau, MicroStrategy, and what have you. And we found just knowing what exists, knowing who produced it, knowing which teams are working on what types of problems and how they're approaching it, it starts to create this sense of community, which is also a big part of it, because there's already so much knowledge.
It can be lonely out there wearing some of this stuff.
Exactly.
One of the things I think you touched upon that is very important, and it's all been touched upon here a little bit, which is you can take some of these models, you can take some of these processes, you can take these learnings, and they're not as industry specific as people think sometimes, or departmentally specific. They can leapfrog you there a little bit. So if you think of something you're in front of, you'll hear this a lot, I think, in your own careers, which is, it's very unique, it's very special, but if you strip it down to the algorithms or the models or the visualization, there's definitely learnings, and sometimes you can find them outside of your organization. I'm going to switch gears a little bit into the IoT and sensors, because there was a couple of conversations around that, and maybe we'll go back to you.
Yeah.
And because we wanted to talk about data as it comes in, and you mentioned clean, and I find that word can be very confusing for people. Mm-hmm. So how do you deal with the fact that we're going to get terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of data in? We're going to count more and more and more on sort of machine learning, if I can say that, and cognitive versus humans. So where do we start, and where does the human equation enter into it from a business person perspective versus what the heavy lifting will happen on the machine algorithm side as to help us get to that clean data?
Yeah, I think you really have to first start with understanding. So I totally agree with focusing on the objective, but before you can even focus on the objective, your team really needs to fundamentally understand that data and the little nuances in that data. And for us, I think that's one of the things we kind of pride ourselves on as well too. Just to give you an example, so just even in the way that we collect data is drastically different from a lot of what our competitors are doing as well too. So there might be some of our competitors that focus on collecting data in a traditional time-based sequence of events. So I'm going to collect accelerometer data every second or every 2 seconds. Well, that might not be good enough. If I'm coming along the QEW and all of a sudden I'm passing somebody on the left and coming back into the middle lane, I could completely miss that event if I were sampling traditional time-based. So I need to sample based on events, or what we call our kind of curve-based logic. So by starting with the right kinds of data that will allow you to figure out what was actually happening in the real world, that's crucially important to us and pivotal to really understanding what is going on. So we have all of that data come streaming into our big data platform, and from our gateway servers, it goes off to BigQuery. We leverage Google BigQuery for a lot. It goes off to our production systems, but then it comes to your point, trying to figure out where the value in that data is, and a lot of value in big data in the IoT world for us comes around benchmarking, helping our customers understand where they really and truly do stand. And we took a number of different approaches at first. Some failed approaches. We said, okay, let's just benchmark everybody based on industry.
That's usually the first place everybody starts, right? That's like
industry. Oh, that's the best thing to do. But that doesn't necessarily work. All these fleets drive completely differently. So we had to develop machine learning algorithms that classified the vocation of a fleet based on their driving patterns, right? But with 1.1 million vehicles, how do you do that at scale? So we developed, you talk about visualization techniques. It's not just visualization for our end customers, it's visualization for our data scientists as well too, right? If I want to classify an office worker type of driving pattern, very simplistically, you take the x-axis, you look at, the hour of the day, the y-axis, the day of the week, look at 6 months of data, and if people fall within that 9 to 10-ish range and, 3 to 4-ish range of driving throughout the course of the day, then they might exhibit that office worker pattern. But it takes us developing our tools internally to be able to allow our data scientists to pick out these patterns at scale, right? So there's that human component that comes in, there's that machine learning component that comes in, and then we can run that algorithm across our entire set to say, okay, well, you look like a hub and spoke delivery type worker. You look like a long haul freight vehicle. And so that's been really important to help our customers benchmark themselves from a safety perspective, from an idling perspective, emissions, all this kind of thing.
What's interesting when I hear you speak too is often we don't even know the value we're in front of. So we unlock value and then we almost need to educate our end user on how to use the value that's in front of them. And the customers and the industries or the organization that learns how to unlock that value and take that risk will have a competitive advantage.
Yeah, it's doing it in the right way as well too, right? Not just, industry is the right way to do it, right? That's the easy way. But ML allows us to get a much more crisp understanding of what's actually going and provide that real value to the end customer.
So we've talked about visualization. I know this is called analytics by design, so we should probably talk a little bit about that and why that's so potent. And you touched a little bit too on it's not just for the end user or the customer, but the business decision maker, the executive, and the data scientist. And maybe, Dan, you could speak a little bit about what you're seeing in healthcare. We both near and dear to us has Humber River and the command center they have and the benefits that's done. So it's becoming almost like a translation engine for people. Maybe you can talk about what you're seeing in data visualization, where it works, where it can maybe be dangerous because people have misinterpreted it.
Sure. Yeah. So there's a number of different areas in terms of data visualization. The command center will probably be one of our top ones. And I don't know if anybody's been to the Humber Command Center, but
by the way, if you ever get a chance to have a tour, it's mind blowing.
I absolutely recommend it. Or just look at some of the videos that are online. But again, what's happened is what a lot of people don't understand with the command center is that there is probably 60 to 70% of that is actually consulting work. The other part is technology, and going back to the idea of not just using technology for technology's sake, each one of the tiles there is...
Sorry, maybe for context, we could give people like...
What it looks like.
Yeah, because GE is a big... Just a shout out for you folks too. It was your project there at Humber, what it is.
Yeah, so the command center, let me just back up really fast. So we created the first hospital command center at Johns Hopkins in the United States. Everybody's familiar, very popular hospital. That center was a descriptive analytics, whereas what we've created at Humber is a whole hospital. It's like a giant cockpit with a data wall that does predictive analytics. So it's going to predict, I've got X amount of surgeries, I'm going to run out of beds by 4 p.m. So I can start discharging and I can look where I can and do some prescriptive analytics of what I need to do to rectify that problem. Each one of the tiles is targeted at a specific outcome, like what I was talking about before. It would be OR, emergency department, or other parts of the hospital.
This is a whole wall, just for visual context. This is an entire wall. It's wild.
Really impressive, and we just keep advancing. We keep adding new tiles almost on a monthly basis. And in fact, they're going to start to integrate data feeds from things like CCTV cameras to look at traffic patterns, how many patients are in the emergency department, how many are flowing out into different other departments. So it's a really complex cockpit. But ultimately, going back to your thing about data visualization, the people that are looking at this aren't data scientists. They're people that operate the hospital. So you might have a CEO of the hospital, like Barb or somebody, wander in there, and she wants to know, what's the current status. So what we've had to do is really simplify, and that's the consulting piece, and work around the processes that are involved to use that data to generate outcomes. So things about what happens if I was using the analogy of having too many patients for surgeries and having to cancel surgeries. Who are the people that need to respond to this? What do they need to do? What are the processes in place? So all of that fundamental, what I would call foundation, needs to be in place before you visualize. Then when you look at it, it has to be very simplistic. And some of them are modeled after the UQ tube stations, right? Yeah. I don't know if you've seen some of them. But it's really just looking at a process. It's kind of simplifying a process map into something that looks like a tube map from the UK. So really trying to simplify that to the end user. And again, the interesting thing about that is we don't have data scientists that are looking at. These are people who are running the hospital. So it has to be very simplistic data visualization. However, there's a huge amount of, so there's actually, just to back up, there's not just data, but there's a huge multi-agent. I know we talked about a multi-agent simulation model. There's a multi-agent simulation model under the hood that's looking to do the predictive and prescriptive analytics on all those tiles. But what the end user sees is really simple. And then we have different clusters that need to see tiles there on this side of the room, and then they'll have tactical workstations on specific things they need to do to drive action within the command center.
So that's an important combination of skills again. I mean, every time one of you speak, we're hearing multidisciplinary, right? Yeah. Data scientists, mathematicians, in this case, physicians, surgeons, operational people from the actual hospital itself, health and safety, all having to have conversation. Eric, maybe I can ask you to speak a little bit about what you're seeing in the CBG retail space. And again, this whole concept of having visualization for the purpose of bringing multifunctional teams. And I'd love you to touch more on your organizational comment, because I can't stress enough, I think organization and culture is failing us miserably in most of our organizations, in spite of ourselves, our best effort. So maybe you can talk about how using some of these visualization techniques, bringing them all to solve for real pain in the system in your industry.
And I'll draw from previous experience and current, because they're actually quite different. At P&G, when I was there 10 years, and we fell in love with visualization. Everything we did had a dashboard or had a immersive visualization. We developed something called the Business Sphere, which was a 360-degree room with multi-projectors and
That's a lot of visualization.
It was an amazing amount of visualization, but the problem was it didn't do anything. So you would have an executive review, you would bring the CEO and his senior leadership team together in a room, and you would study the heck out of anything. If there was a quarter point of share change in Turkey, all of a sudden you dive into this rabbit hole of figuring out why. The point is it didn't matter and there's nothing to do about it. And so it was kind of a natural product of we have all this data, let's bring it together, let's understand it, but you sort of fail to understand anything in the process. Now, I'll contrast that with my current company. We're allergic to dashboarding.
That's hilarious.
We have a philosophy that if I can't click something in the visualization to change something, do something, make something happen, I probably shouldn't be looking at it. And so our philosophy is AI is the new BI. If all I'm doing is reporting something, it's simple enough to find it on a chart, why produce the chart? Just do it. And so we would say that data visualization is a way to inspect the decisions we're making at scale. It's a way to communicate our value, but broad scale data visualization is something that will consume more than it produces. And so we would contrast sort of visualize it because we can in P&G, which is now no longer the culture, in fairness. I think there's been a huge shift from let's take all the data, throw it on the wall and see what sticks, to let's be really judicious about what we invest person time in versus what we invest machine time in. And I think that's really where the data viz horizon is that we're headed towards now is to use it to understand what we're doing and what's happening and verify that it's working versus to understand problems through data viz.
That was very, very well put, by the way, and I think we've all lived, well, some of us have longer in the tooth than others, have lived through the visualization high days. But the pragmatic aspects, and I'm going to ask you to comment on, just picking up where you left off, where machines should take over and humans should just back off, and vice versa, in this area of data analytics. And if you could speak of it in terms of machine learning, cognitive, and analytics, which is all starting to blur a little bit. Because I'm a big fan of saying, just take care of the shitty stuff with the machine learning and let humans do the more value add. But maybe you can talk about what you're saying with your clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of picking up on
it's a Friday, I can say shitty stuff. Right?
No doubt.
I said it on CPAC in Ottawa, and I did not get a laugh, so I really appreciate that.
I think I kind of like what you said around kind of AI as a new BI, or we call AI as a new UI, if you will. So I think there's a whole new discipline, kind of building on kind of the traditional, teams that were building out visualizations and leveraging, all those great tools. And what we found was we had to focus a little bit more on what we call visual literacy. Right, so taking an understanding of kind of human psychology and how people make decisions, the personas, the type of work that people are doing day in and day out in their role, when and where they're making those decisions, and then using that to inform, is it a visualization? And if so, what are the best techniques at the right level of detail that I need to apply? Or is it an experience? Is it a conversational interface? Or is it a push notification, right? So different ways of manifesting kind of that insight, if you will, so it's in the right time and kind of right place. And this kind of really brings together kind of the cognitive aspects and some of the tooling that we have there, best practice around kind of visualization psychology into kind of this visualizing discipline. We call it humanizing data, right? So kind of creating a very human-centric, kind of consumable, immersive experience with the data and those specific insights where it kind of matters most. And, we've gone to the extent of actually kind of training up tens of thousands of individuals on this type of discipline because just, the simple dashboards just aren't cutting it anymore and they're just not getting actioned, right? There's this gap between kind of coming up with these kind of slick dashboards and then actually realizing the value associated with the original intention.
I think you touched on the psychology of it. I know that behavioral psychologists are seeing a huge comeback, ironically, with the onset of AI, and I don't know if it's because everybody's freaking out or they just don't know what to do with it. But this whole concept of multidisciplinary, so behavioral psychologists, visual psychologists, data artists, visualization, doctors, lawyers, like everybody needs to be in the same room now from a culture perspective, which becomes interesting for me. Now we talked a little bit about where we're at. I'd like to talk about what you're seeing in the future, and I'd like to classify the future as not when we're all retired, as more like 5 years from now, because people get a little bit too much comfort, I feel like, when we use the word future. So maybe we can start things like what's coming up fast, and pick on one of the exponential technologies. So maybe analytics and AI, or analytics and blockchain, or analytics and cyber analytics, and 3D, or analytics and telemetrics, and what you're seeing. So maybe I'll go again this way over, and you guys can all have time to think about it, because I think what this room is being so invested in is really going to have to help get organizations ready for what's coming next in this space. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, what's really been exciting.
I love that everybody's set up about this one. This is good.
I'm really excited about the whole vehicle to infrastructure communication and the role that analytics and AI and ML play in that sphere. It's really exciting for me to see partnerships start to evolve as well too. We're doing some incredible things right now, and where you've got like the perfect mix. A city is willing to participate, a customer is willing to be that test bed. We've got the vehicle data, we've got infrastructure players, and everybody comes to board. It's not very often that kind of relationship starts to form. So where we can start looking at things like freight signal priority. So if I'm carrying hazardous goods through your city.
Oh, I was hoping you were going to talk about the Richmond Hill GO train line, which also shares it with a freight train. But that's okay. We can talk about hazardous waste.
If you're looking at hazardous materials flowing through your city, you want to get it through those corridors as quickly as possible. So those corridors should be lit up. And so therefore you need a beacon on these hazardous materials, you need it connected to the vehicle, and you need to light up that corridor. In a similar manner, are there alternative revenue streams for cities to start looking at from a cost recovery perspective? Can you start lighting up certain corridors where it makes sense, where there is maybe 10% freight activity? How often have you been sitting behind, a Class 8 heavy-duty truck at a light, and it gets through, but nobody else does? Should you then be extending that priority a little bit for those vehicles coming through? So smart, intelligent ways for vehicles to communicate with the infrastructure becomes really, really exciting to us, and getting these players on board is hugely important. And to that end, we're developing a lot on the streaming analytics side. So you've got 4,000 vehicles driving around, say, the Oakville area, which is kind of where we're based. Wouldn't it be great to know where everybody's experiencing ABS traction control and then issue an alert to the municipality? Well, yeah, that would be fantastic. And you can do that through this big data ecosystems and this communication from our entire ecosystem through to municipalities. So this whole notion of smart city, vehicle to infrastructure, this is really exciting for us.
Where are you seeing a leader on that in this space? I know the City of Toronto is trying to do some things. We were involved in the hackathon. But I think, Dubai, where are you seeing the leaders where they've actually gone all in infrastructure on this topic and really started to see results, and where could we start seeing it more?
You know what, I think Singapore has always been kind of a good case study from a smart city perspective. And the way that they've kind of approached it is interesting as well too. They really focus on making sure that the government was educated on the data and analytics side. So there are knowledge champions in the government. So it made it easier to have those conversations with industry. So that's interesting. I mean, some of the pilot use cases we're looking at right now are in Detroit with partners like, Myovision does really interesting traffic control type systems. And they're, again, a Waterloo-based company. So some really interesting local things happening as well too, with the start of the Autonomous Vehicle Innovation Network within Ontario.
What's going right here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Under Raquel's labs.
It's a perfect mix of everything, because we're centered here in Toronto with all this world-class AI leadership. We've got automotive players. We've got the right players to make something happen. So it's really exciting, I think, now.
That's great. Eric?
Yeah, so real briefly, I think the one that excites me the most for the near future is bringing in computer vision to the retail and consumer goods space. Traditional data sources are lagged by several weeks. If I'm running a promotion in a store, there are security cameras that run 24 hours a day, and I can see that no one's stopping at my display to buy something. So being able to re-vector to understand sort of what's happening in a continuous real-life way, not a data artifact way, it'll dramatically change how we understand what's happening and what to do.
Maybe we can expand a little bit on when you're talking about lags, because I think that's the pressure we're going to start to feel more and more and more. Hindsight is not really where people are looking for value as much anymore, at least in terms of how we're strategically looking at how to position our companies, especially in the retail space, and you mentioned that a little bit. So, and I find it very interesting now, you're going to pull from a security camera to sell me something, so that gets interesting. So you're grappling on a couple of things there, so maybe we can talk about what you're doing to do more real-time analytics or data provisioning based on existing infrastructure and visualization, which would be facial recognition and things like that. And even I think how people are exploring with their retinas and things like that.
Yeah, so the way I think of it is the analog for an online e-commerce experience, you capture as much behavior as you possibly can in that environment. In physical retail, how do you cleverly mimic that experience in terms of data availability? So you can do it in lab settings with retina tracking. I prefer to get people's positive consent to do those things. But you can also capture...
I was waiting for you to put that out there, by the way.
It's critical because trust is important, right?
Yes.
Because I want to delight you with a great experience, but I don't want you to feel betrayed by it.
Yes.
Right? But I think it's capturing that behavioral experience through whatever means are available and being able to be as smart as your best competitor, whether or not that competitor shares the physical footprint you do.
Thank you. Dan?
So there's 2 or 3 really exciting things that are going to happen in healthcare, and I'll back up just a second to explain why those things are happening. So we saw this really neat thing about ImageNet exceeding the human vision system in 2015.
Yeah.
So that's kind of triggered a bit of an impetus within the radiology community to apply AI. So I think AI is the first bucket I would say was the future, and in radiology it's like front and center of every radiological conference that you go to is AI.
Yeah, I spoke to the Radiology National Association and asked them how honest they wanted me to be on the impact, and a radiologist last night. Huge.
So Jeffrey Hinton did a talk in 2017 where he said, let's just stop training radiologists completely.
Yeah,
It takes 5 years to train them. Let's just stop because we've already exceeded what a human can see. Now, so I think from a GE perspective, I would disagree with that, just because there are cognitive tasks that a radiologist...
So with the radiologist last night, by the way.
Yeah, so basically the radiologist, just to back up, what a radiologist does is he uses a piece of technology, which started out as X-ray, went into CT and MR. So that's a piece of technology. We started with CT. It's not we started with X-ray. It's not a 3-dimensional image. So the radiologist's job was to reconstruct this 2D image into a 3D image and come up with a diagnosis or support a finding that would give the doctor something to come up with a diagnosis. Then we came up with a CT, which is we create multiple slices and we can reconstruct that into 3D. So we didn't get rid of the radiologist at that point. So what I think is what's really going to happen is applying AI and making it seamless within workflow. And I want to ask, who's used AI in the audience? Hands up.
How many people think they haven't and probably
okay,
have would be another question.
Who's used Netflix or Google Maps?
Yeah, that's even better.
Everybody.
Okay.
So you've actually used AI. And the point I'm trying to make is that in healthcare and pretty much every industry, AI is going to need to be seamless. So the reason you don't shell out a Netflix to look at what you should watch next is just because it's inconvenient. And you don't shell out a Google Maps to look at a different traffic app. You find the traffic, you turn the traffic on in Google Maps. So making AI seamless to the radiologist is paramount. Now the second thing, and I know we're running out of time, really, really quick, and we haven't talked about this, nobody's talked about this today, and not a lot of people are talking about it, is edge computing.
Oh, very good.
Edge computing and using the new, if anybody's seen the NVIDIA chip that has AI built onto the chip, that is the hottest commodity within the IT and AI sector right now. And in fact, like GE's partnered with NVIDIA and Intel around some of these technologies to embed them into our machines so that we're getting...
Can you get to the so what? So I don't want to assume that everybody's as geeky as you and I in this room.
So the so what of that is, the reason that's important is because you can have real-time or near real-time computing at a device. So I'll give you an example. So let's say we make, the first part I talked about making radiologists more efficient at doing their job by using an AI. Now the next piece is when the patient actually comes in for a CT, it can take up to 45 minutes to set up the protocols in the machine, for example. And so if we can use AI to support trying to look at the size of the patient, what is the exam, to set up the machine faster, then we're impacting the whole workflow. And that's where I think AI has to go across a whole workflow, and in healthcare it's really exciting because there's a lot of opportunity. But I think also the fact that these new convolutional neural networks, which is actually code writing code, so if you haven't looked into that,
The AlphaGo Zero is a little
definitely have a look at that. And there's actually a really funny Silicon Valley, I don't know if anybody watches Silicon Valley, it's called the No Hot Dog episode.
Anybody
Anyway,
watch
go
that
see that one.
Yeah,
If you want-
okay,
if
we
you want,
got
like,
we
AI
got some
101,
fans.
watch that and then try to work backwards at what he's doing. But it's really funny. But that's basically what a radiologist is. It's the hot dog, no hot dog. Right?
Yeah, that's
basically
exactly
trying to
right.
find a cancer tumor or not a cancer tumor. So supporting the whole workflow. Edge computing is going to be paramount. So cloud computing for things like your phone and your home computer work well. But once you get into industrial internet and things where healthcare, if you get disconnected by the internet, that's a big problem. Like if my watch gets disconnected from the internet, not a big deal, right?
Yeah.
But if my anesthetic gas machine got disconnected in the middle of a surgery, that's a big deal.
That's a big deal,
So
yeah.
we need edge computing for healthcare. So I think those are two exciting things.
That's great. Sami?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be brief because I know we're running out of time. There's so many to choose from. A lot of things that get me excited. But what I find is really practical that kind of impacts all of us, or, as consumers, is augmented intelligence. That's really kind of the advancement of deep learning that's kind of integrated with our day-to-day kind of lives. So a really good example that I'm really fascinated with is Viv, V-I-V. For those who haven't heard about it, Viv was started by kind of the founders of Siri after they left Apple, and they've essentially kind of brought together a number of different technologies, such as natural language kind of processing and understanding, along with API integration, experience design, et cetera, to create kind of this immersive experience that acts like a companion, right? So a good example that they've showcased is around a scenario where, I'm headed to my brother's house and I need a cheap bottle of wine that pairs well with lasagna. That's a pretty complex utterance.
Do you
right?
really buy your brother a cheap bottle of wine? Is that what you're
Right,
saying?
it's just, times are tough, yeah. And the technology, so the natural language is kind of, dissecting that utterance into, and parsing it out into multiple intents. So I know, okay, wine. So I can, use the wine.com kind of interface to determine what are the top kind of recommendations of wines that pair well with lasagna. The second is I know something about the brother and where the brother lives, but pulling the information out of Google Contacts. And then I also look up their address so I can find the fastest path to that specific location. And I just, using deep learning and all the different algorithms, kind of pulling all this information together, just kind of fast forward, to come up with a very kind of clever way of saying a specific recommendation around here are the top 2 or 3 stores on the way that kind of fulfill your request. And it processes all of that in 1/20th of a second, right? That's very powerful. And it's not just analytics that did that, it's analytics, various types of technologies, natural language understanding, and then a very kind of experience-based kind of process to make that very useful to kind of what I want to achieve.
I think that's a really good example as well. And augmented intelligence is actually what we need a little bit more of in most of the industries we're in, which would be great. I want to thank the panel too, because I think we're coming up to the hour here. We heard a lot of really good messages. Cross-functional teams, really important, learn from other industries. And if you notice, I think on all of the conversations to date, including this one, we're starting to hear the language of our industry changing. So you can't have a conversation with analytics without data or AI or machine learning or IoT or sensors and all of those things, which is another reason why cross-functional teams are becoming so very, very critical. Look forward to geeking out with each of you off stage. And thanks all for being here, and I'm going to hand off to you.